Good afternoon. This is Jim Bernau. I'm the founder and CEO of Willamette Valley Vineyards. I want to thank you all for joining me this afternoon on this presentation. We're going to wait just a few minutes, less than a minute to get started. Please think about the kind of questions that you'd like to ask, and I'll do my best to answer them as I go through the presentation. If they relate to the subject that I'm on. Otherwise, I'll try and cover them as best I can at the end of the presentation. I have a number of slides to go through, and I'll go through them as fairly quickly to make good use of everyone's time. The first thing I'd like to do is to thank all of you for logging on and showing an interest in the subject. But I also want to thank Mandy Morgan, who's helped here at the winery put this presentation together, Kimberly Lipscomb, who's our National Sales Coordinator, Christine Clare, who's our winery director, Kathy Shannon, who's responsible for ownership services, along with Karen Gardner, my wife, Jan. We've also had a lot of help from the Oregon Wine Growers Association. John Pratt, who is our president of the Oregon Wine Growers Association, our CEO, Tom Danowski, and his vice president, Jana, as well as key members of our association, like Ed King and his family, Justin in particular, co-founder of King Estate Winery. And then our association that represents our AVA here, the Willamette Valley Wineries Association, Mike McNally in particular, among many other members of the Willamette Valley Wineries Association. This issue is probably best described by the Wine Origins Alliance, which is a group of 24 winery and grape growing organizations in 9 countries. They have a website, origins.wine, and a wonderful, about a 3.5-minute video that you can click on when you go to that site at origins.wine that stars one of our very early winemakers here in Oregon, Harry Peterson Nedry. And he makes a very strong case for what I'm presenting today. Now, this issue, recent issue about the importance of our geographic designations for wine, as well as the temptation to use them fraudulently for profit, it goes back in many years. I think the beginning of a country's action on protecting geographic designations for wine, I think the earliest was in 1919 when the French government made those designations essentially a state asset. And their misuse or their deceptive use, fraudulent use, they made actually a crime. And so this is an important issue. It's an important issue for us. The first thing I wanted to do is to draw your attention to the American Viticultural Area Manual. This is a 26-page manual that's provided by the TTB for the industry as a means by which those can make, industry members can make an application to the TTB for a geographic area to be considered for designation. Now, there's obviously different forms of designation, but the gold standard for geographic designations in the United States is our AVAs. And the process can take upwards of 6 years and volumes of documentation about the special attributes of the geographic area that's being proposed, whether it's the geography, the geology, the soil, the climate, and so on. And then they offer opportunities for public comment. So for wine growers, it's like earning a master's degree for their designated area. It's a pedigree in which it can be used, the designation can be used on the label, packaging, and marketing materials. that consumers can rely upon in making their purchasing decisions, and also the industry can invest in to elevate the prominence of their AVA. Now, there was a broadly quoted study that the Swiss Institute did that reports the single most important information to wine consumers in making their purchasing decisions is the advertised geographic origin. In fact, the Origins organization that I mentioned earlier, the Wine Origins Alliance, found that 94% of American wine drinkers support laws that would protect consumers from misleading wine labels. And this issue has come to you as a result of the federal and state of Oregon regulators investigating the labeling, packaging, and advertising claims being made by Joe Wagner, who's the producer of Elouan and Willametter wines. And so that's what this presentation is focused on. Now, of course, this next slide just shows you the the federal AVAs that have been designated in Oregon. A number of you are very familiar with these designations. This is the code. This is parts of the code, federal code, that relates to this subject. The important parts of this code are that a valid appellation of origin is required to be on the label, packaging, and advertising materials. The representations that are prohibited are any statement that's false or untrue in any particular way, or irrespective of falsity directly or by ambiguity, omission, or inference. It tends to create a misleading impression. Statements or representations which indicate or infer an origin other than the true place of origin are prohibited by law. Unapproved appellations of origin or AVAs are also prohibited, and the listings of more than one AVA is prohibited. Now, the federal labeling rules do allow geographic descriptions of origin by political boundaries and states. For example, this is an example of Mayomi that legally describes the origins of the contents by 3 counties. Now, that is permitted under the federal law. If you were to make a AVA representation, however, those representations are controlled by the content requirements in each state. For example, in Oregon, Oregon has the highest content requirements for AVAs. 95% of the wine grapes must come from the stated or inferred AVA. In fact, for varietal content, it's 90%. So if you list Pinot Noir, it must be 90% in the bottle. And both Oregon and California have a 100% requirement when it comes to the origin of the grapes from the state. And so if you're to make an Oregon designated wine, 100% of the wine grapes must come from Oregon. And the same is true for California. Now, this slide that's in front of you are some very well-known California AVAs that use the designation of coast. Now, Oregon does not have a coast AVA, but California has developed quite a reputation for some of their coast AVAs. Now, if someone was to be knowledgeable about how these laws work and were looking to Oregon as an opportunity to exploit, what would they might want to do? If they don't have a vineyard, they don't have a tasting room or a winery, and they weren't concerned with abiding by the law, maybe a coastal inference might be effective for them. So here is one of the first concerns of the Oregon wine growers is a misrepresentation of geographic orientation or origin. For example, Pinot Noir is not grown on the Oregon coast. Although I can understand why it would be attractive to use on branding because of the consumer's awareness of the California coast AVAs. The other issue you'll see on this packaging is there are 3 Oregon AVAs listed: Willamette Valley, Umpqua Valley, and Rogue Valley. And I think, as you all know, that is not a legal representation of our AVAs, because in Oregon, to use an Oregon AVA, it must be 95% content in the bottle. And of course, the reason for that is that our AVAs are not just addresses or origins or locations where grapes are grown. Our AVAs are pedigrees upon which a number of standards and requirements must be met for their legal use. Here you can see what happens when this type of misuse occurs on packaging. You can see here the retailer put a sign up on the case box where they're using the term Willamette Valley in their description of the product Elouan. Here's a little closer look of this confusion that this type of packaging has created. It's hard to blame the wine steward. She was understandably confused in this because of this packaging. Here's another example of actually quite a sophisticated reviewer, and as you can see, also a confusion occurred because Elouan is not a Willamette Valley AVA Pinot Noir. But because of its packaging and how it's marketed, you can see how even a pretty sophisticated reviewer was misled. So when you look at this, you think about, well, how effective has this strategy been, especially when you consider this wine has only been in the market a fairly short time. Now here's the NIELSEN scan data showing that apparently the #1 selling Oregon Pinot Noir in the nation, according to the NIELSEN scans, above $17 a bottle, is apparently grown on the Oregon coast and is now made in Lodi, California, or near Lodi, California. And that's also true for the rosés, between $14 and $19 a bottle. So the question might be, how did these older wineries in the Willamette Valley get overtaken so quickly? And I think that the lesson here is this is what happens when someone takes something very valuable that isn't theirs and then deeply discounts it. So this slide will show you the NIELSEN data and the relative positioning of the AVAs. So if you can brand your wine with a Willamette Valley AVA, the average retail price of those at retail on this slide, as you can see in this period, the 52-week period ending June 30, according to NIELSEN, was $25.06. Now, if you appellated your Pinot Noir with Oregon appellation, the average retail price is $14.64. And so if Elouan were legally branded, legally labeled, and legally advertised, they would be competing in that lower price segment. So what this demonstrates to you is that what happens when you take a Willamette Valley AVA inferred product and you put it on discount under $20 a bottle, you can dramatically increase sales of the product. The other thing you can see here is even though it has been discounted, it's definitely priced higher than your average Oregon AVA, your Oregon appellated branded products. And so there's a premium that's being made. And for every 100,000 cases at FOB, it's almost $3 million. So the great danger for Oregon producers who are lawfully labeling their products is that if they have to respond to this erosion in their sales as a result of this discounted approach, it can collectively result in upwards of $70 million in lost winery revenue a year if all the wineries had to essentially go down to compete with the pricing strategy that Copper Cane is using for Elouan. You know, the other one of the challenges that Oregon producers have is we don't have the scale in winemaking that is possible. For example, the facility that Elouan, the Copper Cane is using for Elouan that's near Lodi, is a 4 million case custom crush facility, contract facility, which is actually larger in its capacity than all 769 Oregon wineries combined. Now, I brought you back to this information. This is actually right off of the TTB government website. And this is a slide that shows you what the label requirements. And so the reason why I'm showing you this is just to make sure you're aware. You already know of some of the requirements under the law, but I want you to look at this section that is circled in red. It says domestic wines may have this statement further qualified with terms such as produced, meaning not less than 70% of the wine was fermented at the stated address. So that means that if you're taking the grapes, you're making them into wine at your stated address, 75% and above, that you use the term produced. Now, vinted may be used if if the wine is subject to cellar treatment, which means this is wine that you might be trucking in bulk that has been legally made into wine in another state. So the way this works is that under the law, you can't use a state AVA like an Oregon AVA, which is Willamette Valley or other AVAs, unless the wine is actually made in the state of origin. But you can bottle it in an adjacent state, and use that AVA designation. But the wine has to be made in the state of origin. So I'm drawing your attention to this particular part of the law so you can understand just how the federal regulators missed what deception was going on in the submission of the certificate of label applications by Copper Cane. Now here on this slide on the left, you can see the label application that's made to the federal government. And you can see the wine appellation circled in red, stated Oregon. So the reviewer can look at that application, and they, of course, go over and look at the label the label that's actually made as a part of the application, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can see circled at the bottom, vinted and bottled, Elouan, Rutherford, California. So any AVA designation, any inference to an AVA would be legal because this wine was vinted. It wasn't produced in Rutherford, California. In other words, it wasn't made from grapes into wine. That's what that label reviewer is thinking, which means that they would approve this label, which the TTB actually did approve this label. And you'll see that there's an AVA inference up on this label where the word Willamette is used. Now, what the TTB regulator doesn't know is that this wine was not made in Oregon. There you can see it a little bit better view of this same label. Now, here's as you get further away from this label submission of the federal government, these are the things that they don't see. This is on the website of Copper Cane that promotes this wine. And as you can see here, a much bolder representation, an AVA designation, which is illegal. But it's not something that the federal regulator would have seen. Just like in the first example I showed you, where the Oregon coast, a fictitious geographic designation was used, and where 3 of our states' AVAs were used, the TTB regulator doesn't see that either because the case markings are not submitted to the AVA the federal government for review. Although the law does require that they abide by the law and that their representations they make in their TTB label applications must be reflected consistently and accurately on their packaging as well as their advertising materials. Here's another label of the copper cane for Elouan. Take a look at the on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see the wine appellation circled in red, Oregon. You'll see where it was made. It was made at Lang Twins, which is near Lodi, California. That's that 4 million case facility, which also makes Meiomi. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the term vinted and bottled again, making the TTB regulator assume that this was wine that was made in Oregon and simply trucked to California to be bottled. And then you'll see something that clearly the TTB regulator missed, which is under the federal law, you can only make an inference or state one AVA on your label. And here there are 3. And I think it's possible they might have missed it because the full term of the pedigree or the AVA that's been provided by the federal government is Willamette Valley, Umpqua Valley, and Rogue Valley. Now this is another label, different product produced by Copper Cane. Here you can see on the left, this product is listed as an Oregon appellation. And so the reviewer might think, okay, so this wine has been made in Oregon, so the inference to the Willamette Valley is legal. So you'll go over to where you can see the back label, the area that's circled, vinted, and bottled by, leading the TTB regulator to believe that that's what the case is. And so it's conceivable to see how or why the TTB regulator, in reviewing this label application, thought that this label would be okay. And it is an approved label. You can see the signature there at the bottom on the left-hand side. Now take a look at this label. Take a look at the front label, and just look carefully at it. It's all in you can see just in black ink. Now this is the actual produced product with the label affixed to the bottle, and here you can see there's some words that are in red: the variety, the AVA, and the vintage. And so it's clearly, from at least our point of view, an attempt to make the consumer believe that this product is a Willamette Valley AVA designated product, which it is not, nor would it qualify to be. On the other side of you can see on the back label, it says it's sourced from the territory of Oregon, and that is not a legal designation for even for the state of Oregon. In fact, I think the last time that was legal was in 1858. Now, this is what happens when the retailer sees this information. They're relying upon these representations, and so this wine was made for Total Wine and More. It's a higher margin direct wine supplied by the producer, Copper Cane, to Total Wine and More. And so because of that, in the higher margins, it's often promoted more highly and displayed more highly in their stores. But here you can see the retailer we don't believe the retailer is at fault for these misrepresentations. We believe that they were misled by the marketing materials and the branding on the product. But you can see what happens. You can see on the left that they've listed on their website the origin of the Willamette as the AVA, which it's legally not. And you can see then also on the price tag that's listed on the shelf. It says its origin is the Willamette Valley, If this was actually truthful, it would list the city near Lodi, California. But you don't get the price premiums of $29.99 a bottle by listing it according to its true origin. So in short, the facts on Copper Cane's deception are pretty easy to see. The Pinot Noir is not grown on the Oregon coast. That's a fictitious designation. Clearly, we understand why it was used. The Willamette Valley, Umpqua Valley, and Rogue Valley appear as if they're nested in this fictitious coastal designation. And actually, these three AVAs are independent of each other, designated wholly residing within the state of Oregon, all with different characteristics, all subject to the 95% content rule of Oregon law. And none of these, of course, are on the Oregon coast. You know that these wines were not made in the state of Oregon, and thus no inference can be made. According to the AVAs, the only designation that they legally can use is that the state is the state of origin. I just wanted to draw your attention to this because this happened right during the period of this controversy over these labels, that the United States Senate on September 26th, at the request of the the Wine Origins Alliance, passed Senate Resolution 649, which was bipartisan support, including Senator Jeff Merkley from the state of Oregon, calling attention to the distinctiveness and the value of our American viticultural areas. Here you can see that Jeff Merkley led a group, our Oregon congressional delegation. This is simply just an abbreviated version of the letter that they sent to the TTB asking for an investigation of Copper Cane and their concerns over their labeling and advertising, and they called for an investigation which included field audits to determine the content of the wine, to make sure that the representations that were being made in the labels and advertisings were accurate. And they said if they have found any that were not, they asked for the immediate removal of the product from the marketplace. Now, this is a slide that simply shows you aspects of the Oregon law, the Oregon Liquor Control Commission's administrative rules. You can see there, just take a minute to see what those administrative rules are. It says the commission sets these rigorous labeling standards, which we do. We have the highest, Oregon has the highest standards in the country for AVA content as well as for variety content. It requires that there be accurate presentation on the product. And it also says that their authority in their governing of this is on wines regardless of where they were produced and bottled, that the rules prevail in all cases. And that they may establish standards that are beyond the federal standards, or they can also disallow federal regulations. Even label approvals can be disallowed by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. And then the thing at the bottom, it says, is the commission, in addition to any other sanction, may require the licensee to stop selling and recall the wine. Now, I think that we all know that the Oregon Liquor Control Commission and the TTB are in the middle of their investigations over Copper Cane's labeling and advertising, as well as for their winemaking, as to make sure that it's consistent with their advertising. And so this investigation is ongoing. So it'll be, we'll have to see what comes as a result of that investigation. I do know that the Willamette Valley Wineries Association is asking the Oregon Liquor Control Commission today to suspend Copper Cane's licenses to do business in the state of Oregon. They have 2 licenses in Oregon. One is a certificate, which allows them to ship into Oregon their wine. And the second is a direct shipper's permit, which allows them to sell wine directly to consumers in Oregon. The Willamette Valley Wineries Association is asking the Oregon Liquor Control Commission to suspend Copper Cane's licenses for 12 months. And the second thing they're asking the Oregon Liquor Control Commission not to renew any licenses allowing Copper Cane access to the Oregon market until they demonstrate that they are in full compliance with federal and state law with respect to all of the wine that they make. Now, this is another aspect of the issue that developed. I'm just covering this just to make sure that I answer all of your questions. This happened during the same time period where Copper Cane canceled all of their Southern Oregon or Rogue Valley grape picks in 2018, ostensibly for smoke taint. It was over 2,000 tons of fruit, which represents about 20% of the fruit grown in the Rogue Valley. These notices came only a couple of days before the picks were scheduled, which means these growers had no time in which they could find alternative buyers for their fruit. Oregon winemakers did reach out and started to offer help to the growers in the Rogue Valley. Here you can see one of the lab reports that shows very low test results for what the compounds are that you look for in studying smoke taint on fruit. And so the Oregon winemakers formed a coalition to help out these growers. Now, one of the issues that came up is, well, was it really smoke taint or was it something else? And I know that this has been quite a controversy. This slide would help you maybe better understand what the situation is. 2,000 tons, you know, that's a lot of wine. It's over 130,000 cases of wine. So that's quite a reduction. But what we do know from the 2017 information from the Oregon Liquor Control Commission reported to them by Copper Cane, they bought tonnage in 2017 that equals 261,000 cases of volume. And so if you look at the scan data, or you remember the scan data that we covered earlier, you can see that under the NIELSEN scan data for the 52-week period ending June, they did about 40,000 cases of Pinot Noir in scan sales, and they did about 5,700 cases of Rosé in the same period. Now, keep in mind that NIELSEN scan data does not include all the sales. These are only grocery store chains that report to NIELSEN's, and there's a number of retailers that do not, as well as restaurants do not. And so depending upon the type of brand, you can have a brand that maybe only 50% of the sales are reported through NIELSEN. If you've got a grocery store brand that's in these price points, it could be potentially up to 70% is reported in NIELSEN. But if you did have, let's say, maybe 100,000 cases in sales in the United States on an annual basis, and you did bring in 2017, the equivalent of 261,000 cases of volume, you probably got a significant inventory problem. And so this might help people try and better understand what Copper Cane might have been facing during as they went up to the 2018 harvest. Now here's the group of us. You can see this group from the right to the left. There's Representative David Gomberg. He's the chair of the House Trade and Economic Development Committee. Next to him, going to the left, is Senator Alan DeBoer from the Ashland-Medford area. Then Gary Leaf, Representative Gary Leaf from the Douglas County area. Christine Clare, who's the winery director at Willamette Valley Vineyards. Justin King is the co-founder of King Estate Winery, and then myself. And we're down there actually helping those growers pick those grapes. We had a coalition of 4 wineries, King Estate, the Irie Vineyard, as you many know, the founding vineyard in the Willamette Valley, now operated by son Jason Lett, and then of course Sylvan Ridge and Willamette Valley Vineyards. We were able to save 149 tons of fruit. We paid those 6 growers the full contracted price for the fruit, and the wine will be sold with the net proceeds going to the Rogue Valley Vintners to help the uninsured growers that were devastated by those abrupt cancellations, pick cancellations. There we're going to be asking retailers to help us and our distributors to help us with the sale of this wine, which is a fundraiser. We'll be releasing the Rosé in March, the Chardonnay in June, and the Pinot Noir in August of this next year. There's Joe Ibrahim, the head winemaker at Willamette Valley Vineyards. He's actually got that Rogue Valley fruit that's in that wine thief. He's got a big smile on his face, and that's because he loves this wine. Here's the report from our Solidarity winemakers. You can see Joe Ibrahim saying that there isn't the slightest hint of smoke in the wine whatsoever. You can see Brett Stone, winemaker at King Estates, talking about how the wine is showing great potential. And then you can see JP down at Sylvan Ridge. He's also on the Oregon Wine Board. He's saying that he just can't believe these grapes were rejected. Now, smoke taint, can vary between vineyards in the Southern Oregon. But what we found in the testing was that there was a lot of great fruit out there, and we just regret we had such little time to save what we could. The Governor Brown, put together a task force to help the growers. She actually met with the growers the day we were there doing the pick to help them. She then mobilized the agencies in the state of Oregon to figure out how to help the uninsured growers in particular, because some of these growers are financially devastated by these pick cancellations. And we're getting a lot of help as well in figuring out how we're going to be able to bring this wine to market as a fundraiser for these growers. This last couple of slides has to do with the issue, a controversy over the payment of tax. One of the concerns, of course, of Oregon winemakers is that all Oregon winemakers or winemakers and wineries using Oregon AVA designations, we must pay a $25 per ton tax on our fruit. And that's what this references. And then one of the questions, of course, that came forward was, well, are out-of-state wineries who are using Oregon AVA designations paying the tax that they should be paying? And to the best of our ability, it looks like that a number of them may not be. It appears, according to the estimates of the Oregon Wine Board, that it's possible that up to 20% of the 2017 harvest somehow escaped paying the tax. And so that's one of the issues that we're studying very carefully to see how we can, one of the things the Oregon legislature certainly didn't intend is they didn't intend for Oregon winemakers to invest in creating the value in our AVAs to have them exploited by a winery outside the state receiving the advantage of not having to pay the tax. Had Copper Cane paid all the tax on all their tonnage that they purchased from Oregon, since they've been purchasing wine grapes in Oregon, they probably would owe the state about $200,000. One of the issues that came up was, is I wanted to give you at least a little background as to what happened to us, to Willamette Valley Vineyards over this whole issue. Earlier this year, I did talk with Joe Wagner on the phone, and I did try and convince him to stop using Oregon's AVAs. I told him that I felt that he was misrepresenting the origin of his wines. In addition, I told him I felt he was infringing on our trademarks. Willamette Valley Vineyards actually has trademarks on Willamette Valley Vineyards and on Willamette that go back many years. These are federal trademarks. And a short time after that conversation that I had with him, his attorneys filed to cancel our trademarks. And we're obviously now having to defend our trademarks with the Federal Trademark Office, because there is a process by which people can actually petition to have the federal government cancel a trademark that they view as generic. The argument that was presented to the Federal Trademark Office was that because the AVA is of the same name, that now the term is generic and therefore no longer available for federal trademark protection. And of course, our response is that just because the AVA is designated doesn't mean that makes the trademark, the wine brand trademark, invalid. And so we're going to be vigorously defending our trademarks, as you can imagine. And not just for us, but as you probably know, I have a number of people here who on this program know that there are many wineries, not many, but there are a number of wineries in the United States that have names that are similar or the same to AVAs. And just because an AVA is established, it doesn't mean that the winery's trademark is no longer valid. And I think there are probably some very famous California winery brands that would be facing this same predicament if that case were true. Okay, so let's see, what else have I got on here? Says here, if the wine is being made in California and not in Oregon, are they required to adhere to Oregon's 90% rule for Pinot Noir? And the answer is yes. If it is legal for a California producer to truck Pinot Noir across the state line and make wine, but they can only give it an Oregon designation. They can't attribute it to an AVA. But they must abide by Oregon law, which is they must follow the 90% rule for Pinot Noir. They cannot rely upon the national standard of 75%. They must abide by Oregon law and to use that Oregon designation. If they don't want to do that, they can make an American wine. They can use an American designation. And fall below the 90% varietal rule that we have here in Oregon. Great question about that. I want to thank you all very much. You've been a patient with me. You've been 45 minutes with me on this presentation. If you do want to contact me, don't hesitate to call the winery at 503-588-9463, or you may email me, and my email address is right there on that ending slide. Thank you very much for the time you've given me, and also thank you very much for doing what you can to support truth in labeling and integrity in winemaking.